Welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Kinghorn. I'm with the Center for Business Growth and Innovation in Advance Iowa at the University of Northern Iowa. Glad to have you participating in our, what now is a daily webinar series, Coping with COVID. We're pleased today to have with us two experts, individuals who are well-versed at helping small businesses through a number of their challenges. Dan Bumblauskas and his partner Paul Bumblauskas with PFC Services. When this COVID outbreak first approached, they got together, and we'll hear in just a minute a little bit more about how they conceived of a white paper, but they decided to take some ideas and thoughts about how to manage through the uncertainty and the turbulent times, and they've created a white paper, and we'll use that as basis of our conversation today. And then at the end, we'll share with you how you can go about getting access to that white paper to help your own businesses. So with that as the start, I'd like to welcome Paul and Dan to our webinar. Thank you, gentlemen. Let's
thanks for having us, Paul. I didn't know if we were supposed to segue there.
Yeah, a little clunky at times. So introduce yourselves a little bit. Give us a little background on your, your career and what you do to help small businesses, and then once we get done with that, share with us what was the impetus for writing this white paper.
Paul B., do you want to kick this off, or would you like me to?
I'll kick us off. I'm Paul Bumblauskas. I'm the owner, president of PFC Services, along with my son, Dan. And I've been fortunate enough to have a number of different positions, from executive VP of operations to CFO to regional vice president of sales at both public and private companies, and have had the opportunity or been required to live through a few different turbulent times. Managing in turbulent times actually goes back to the great stock market crash of 1987, which now seems to be a minor issue. It, of course, re-evolved during the Great Recession, and, of course, it was really easy to bring this back into play because of the coronavirus with some minor modifications. The reason it's in play is that most of the business strategies that you were following before the coronavirus are no longer relevant to the current situation, at least for the foreseeable future. And our intent with the white paper was to bring some quick target towards what you need to be working on that's different from perhaps what you were working on before the virus hit, so that you're not working on a project and not considering the risk dynamics or the risk mitigation techniques that you need, plus the opportunity identification for the recovery. Again, applying some of the best and brightest that I've worked with over the years. These are some of the best techniques to employ right now to keep your business safe and sound and get it ready for the recovery, which is coming. For sure it's coming. Dan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, so my name's Dan Bumblauskas, as we can see on the slide here, and I'm a professor within the UNI College of Business focused on operations and supply chain management, but I'm also the vice president of PFC Services, our consulting firm. So we're a father-son team, and we've been seeing a lot of our client base, both in small and large businesses, really dealing with implementation of emergency and contingency plans, as well as we'll call it ad hoc spontaneous development, because many didn't have the foresight to maybe lock into a pandemic insurance plan like the Wimbledon Organizing Committee did to get their settlement and payout in terms of covering insurance and unpredictable, stochastic, as we call it, in industrial engineering and operations management, and types of events that occur. So how can we help improve our businesses continuously during these very difficult and challenging times?
Perfect. So first and foremost, I'd bring to light something that we don't want to pass on. And as we record this, the Paycheck Protection Program is active. I will give you an update. I'm the point person for two different companies the coronavirus chairperson, if you will, and both those companies have active and approved applications for the Paycheck Protection Program that are in the millions of dollars. And the ability to obtain these loans is going to be caused by your relationship between your company and your bank and your specific bank contact. Banks are prioritizing the Paycheck Protection loans, at least to my knowledge, based on the relationships with their customers and their understanding of the needs of their customer base. So that first and foremost, you've got to get that Paycheck Protection Program filed if you've got less than 500 employees, which I'm sure many of our listeners and viewers have. Is that correct, Paul?
That's correct, yep.
So that's probably first and foremost before we get into the nitty-gritty details of managing during turbulent times. As we record this, the Paycheck Protection Program is indeed active, but it's very reliant upon your relationship with the bank.
And unfortunately, for some, they didn't view or weren't in a situation to put a lot of emphasis in that relationship with the banker. Lots of reasons why. We're not judging. We're not here to suggest one way or the other than to your point, and it is so important, that relationship, when things start to become difficult, that's when you really want to have them, and they want to be there for you to know what's going on so they can manage through that. Just want to remind our viewers right now that we are taking questions live. If you're going through Zoom, watching us through Zoom, you can click down below at the chat link and type in a question. If you're watching us through Facebook, again, send us your questions there, and we'll make sure that Dan and Paul have a chance to answer them for us. So you mentioned the white paper, Managing in Turbulent Times. What are some of the key things that you think are essential for business owners to do when you start to get confronted with a crisis or an event that is perceived as being disruptive?
Well, I'll kick us off and then I'll move it over to Dan. First of all, we are in the eye of the storm, so it's not probably the best time to analyze how well we prepared for or how well we're actually handling the coronavirus situation, in my opinion. It's probably best to review that once we've gotten through this and we can reflect back and change our plans, whether it's our business plans or our personal plans, in case something like this should happen again. So it's probably not very productive to spend a lot of time analyzing what we could have done but didn't do. One of the aims of the white paper is to get you thinking about some of the risk and opportunity dynamics that have rapidly shifted on us so that you can immediately address what's best for your business. And I must point out the two most under-addressed areas at any business out of the 6 that we always talk about. One is risk mitigation, which is something that's got to be near and dear to your heart right now. And second is going to be opportunity identification. So not to mention something that's almost quite laughable, I guess, but one of the companies I deal with, we're now targeting a possible acquisition of a company that's been shut down in the state of Pennsylvania, because if we acquire the company, they become an essential business. And as given that example, you can probably see that this sort of a idea or concept would not come into play unless your mindset had shifted more towards the risk mitigation and opportunity identification, given the current situation. And it's one of those things you have to think your way through. Dan, you want to add to that or complement that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got a few things going on here. One is this is giving everyone a chance. You said not to necessarily slow down and look back at what you could have done. However, if you think a little bit about some of the most successful companies that have navigated through depressions, great recessions, et cetera, the one thing that I've seen as a common theme is that they do have contingency and emergency plans. And these don't have to be something that takes you quarters, years, months to generate. I was working with an organization that generated one the day before they implemented it. So it's something that can be acted on quickly, but usually they're not, because usually we don't deal with situations like global financial crises, great recessions, and pandemic outbreaks like this. But when you have that plan ready to go off the shelf, it saves you a little bit of time in hindsight. Now, moving forward, how do we adjust our operations so that they're able to do more with less in terms of having people perhaps on various furloughs, not being able to get into work for a variety of reasons. And that's something that a lot of the clients have been asking about, is how do we handle these situations, especially when it comes to having a already lean workforce. How do we get even leaner?
So, a couple of times the two of you have alluded to situations that are kind of preparatory, and I think, Paul, you had made the comment there'll be time to go back and review what could have and should have been done. But in the middle of the crisis, that's not always convenient. What are some of the common questions and concerns that people are reaching out to the two of you with right now that you're hearing, and what's some of the advice that you're giving them?
Well, I guess first and foremost, let's look at the fundamentals of what drives your business, and they're actually fairly simple to identify. It's in your profit model. There's revenue, there's gross profit, there's payroll costs. A lot of times rent expense and facility costs are super expensive. So identify your profit model. Where you'd normally evaluate something every month or every quarter, you want to start evaluating it every day or every week. To give you a specific example, I have a daily budget at one of the companies I'm responsible for, and I now know what our daily profit is using fixed and variable expense analysis, our exact daily payroll cost, and our sales and gross profit. And that has helped us so much towards identifying what we need to do each day and prioritize our activities. So just narrow your timeline. If you review something once a month, review it once a week. If you review it once a week, review it every day. And by narrowing the timeline, I think you'll see that the keys to your business are going to come into focus quite rapidly. And some of this will require some preliminary work, as it did to create a daily profit model. And to be honest, you don't want a daily profit model when things are working well. You only need it when you have a situation like this at hand. You want to make sure you have a positive cash flow every day. But narrow the timeline, I guess, is the theme behind this, and take a look at things more frequently. Does it require more work? It does, yes. But you're probably going to be delaying, canceling some projects to make time for these new activities. So it's not like you're going to be working on both at the same time. You're going to want to defer some of the projects going forward. Do you want to add to that, Dan?
Yeah, so as far as what you were talking about with narrowing the timeline, it's in the paper, it's bullet number 3, shorten the time window, is what Paul has been referring to here. But I would say that from the kind of highest level perspective, think about how you're going to ramp up and ramp down, or scale down and scale back up again, depending on what's going on with your business. I've been working a lot in recent weeks with healthcare providers and what's happening, and it's like the Wild West out there. We've heard about the PPE on the news, but what's actually happening is major capacity imbalances, where we're hearing on the news about all of the worst case scenarios where we're out of beds and ventilators, but many hospitals are in situations where they have the opposite problem. They ramped and scaled up. They predicted with the models that they were going to hit peaks a week or two ago, and now they haven't. And so they're having to furlough and scale back, but they're going to have to ramp back up again if that model was wrong and was off on time, right? So you're seeing all sorts of challenges like this. I was on a group with about 25 faculty from around the country yesterday, and the forecasting of staffing and PPE it's very difficult right now, because the healthcare models are proving to be somewhat tumultuous, and they're not as accurate as we'd hope because of the underlying assumptions, which is then driving forecasting accuracy error. So we're talking about a lot of the operational sales operations, S&OP sort of stuff that goes on in forecasting. So now you've got to really look at that in that shortened time window, that narrowed timeline, and think about how you're going to ramp up and ramp down really quickly. I think the thing that this comes back to is, if normally this would take you 12 months to implement, now you have about 12 hours. So how are you going to deal with that? And what are you going to do? I think what I've noticed is that we're going into emergency mode, and we're looking at worst case disaster plan, and now we're implementing it. And actually, if you look back, I mentioned the Great Recession. The best performing stock on the stock exchange during the Great Recession was Caterpillar. And when they asked Cat's executive team how they did it, exactly what I just said. They had a contingency emergency plan, they pulled it off the shelf, and they executed all of it quickly. And then they curtailed their operations, and they ramped them back up again quickly when the time came. So companies need to be thinking about that.
So looking at that contingency plan that Dan's talking about, I've got an extension of the Turbulent Times white paper. This is not in there, so you'll probably want to take some notes. Step one, identify your resources, internal and external, and they're much deeper than you think. If you haven't been able to rely on your sales team for accurate information, start to require them to provide accurate information. This is all about relationship building. So identify your internal and external resources. Secondly, determine your critical success factors, and they almost always have to have numeric attachments, KPIs, key performance indicators, or benchmarks and statistics, as Google would say. You've got to have some numeric evaluation of what's going on. So your critical success factors. And the most important thing with the crisis, and I'll use an example in a second, is identify your constraints and identify them with regularity. An example right now was we had a ventilator constraint. As soon as I heard about the ventilators being manufactured, what was my thought process? Who's going to operate all these extra ventilators? So it was very interesting. If you watch the newscast, they talked about the ventilators almost as if solving the ventilator problem was going to clear a constraint, but it only cleared the constraint for about 8 seconds. And then they realized we have no one to operate the ventilators. So if you take a look at your business and you identify your constraint, and by the way, there's only one that stops you from growing or stops you from being successful today, clear that constraint, move on to the next constraint, the next constraint, the next constraint. And I think this emergency strategy that Dan's talking about is going to become a lot more manageable in your particular business. The other thing I'd say, I call it C cubed. It's the key to a positive relationship of any kind, is communication, compromise, and commitment to your business. So those are the three things: communication, compromise, and commitment. And to give you an example, in Pennsylvania, the contractor construction channel was shut down by the governor, and we were able to find out within a matter of 4 hours what every single customer for the company was going to do as a result of the governor's directive, and we were able to help all of our customers file for exemptions, and almost all of them reopened within a matter of days. Without this communication, you really cannot optimize your business. And this is not something you'd want to do probably on a long-term basis, but during an emergency situation like this, during turbulent times, I think it's one of the keys: communication, compromise, and commitment.
Perfect. Want to remind everybody we're talking to Dan and Paul Bumblauskas from PFC Services about managing operations in turbulent times. So it sounds to me a lot like when uncertainty is around, and certainly this would qualify as disruption and uncertainty, you're advocating kind of a prioritization, right, of their actions. And if I heard you correct, Paul, if you start with what is a known constraint, what's kind of limiting your ability to act and deal with that, are there any other, that's a good place to start. Are there any other advice around priority, prioritization that you guys can give our listeners to help them as they manage through this?
Well, I think when you're looking at your day-to-day, taking a look at what is important to get to the next step is super important. If your business is threatened because of cash flow, there's a technique in here that talks about matching your payables and receivables. It's critically important to make sure that the change in payables and receivables is roughly the same. Does that mean delaying your supplier payments? Absolutely. And one other note to kind of identify those areas to work on: if you're in the supply channel, which we all are, in a lot of cases it's like a snake that swallowed a large animal. You've kind of puffed up in the middle, and all the pressure is pushing towards you and in both directions. So you've got to kind of clear that out so that, in my example, my awkward example, the snake can digest this large animal. Otherwise, your inventory builds, your receivables grow, and you end up with a lot of problems that you probably would not have had before. Validating the supply chain is super important. Knowing what your vendors are going to do if you're going to experience supply shortages, super important. And then validating the demand channel, which is making sure your customers are still open for business, and determine what they need in terms of the highest priority. Those are some things you can do. Just make sure your workday is kind of balanced out so that you're primarily working on these things that are of short-term emergency importance. And keep in mind, too, you're outside your relevant range, which means, all of our management training has a lot of assumptions attached to it. And you can go outside your relevant range through growth, meaning your company is growing too fast, or you can go outside your relevant range through decreasing business. Target's probably the greatest example, Dan, where we work with them, and their challenge right now is that their household goods business is skyrocketing, but every other part of the business is decimated at the present second. So they've got to shift their entire focus from one category to another. And plus, first and foremost, as the white paper says, remember, we got to keep our customers, our vendors, our employees healthy. That's the key to solving this problem. It's not a financial crisis. It's a health crisis that has caused a temporary economic problem. Dan?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned from an industry perspective, I think everyone is thinking about, the small business that's struggling, that restaurant or vendor on downtown Main Street, Cedar Falls or Marietta, Georgia, that's really getting, there's other companies that have the opposite problem. We talked about, you just heard Paul use Target, Walmart, Hy-Vee, Kroger. These grocery store chains are running at 200 to 300% of normal loadings, right? So you've got these huge swings happening for other industries in the opposite direction, where they're recalibrating resources and shifting bottlenecks. When Paul was talking in the last couple of iterations here that Paul's been talking about, from an academic perspective, we refer to this as bottleneck management. So know where that bottleneck is, and you can adjust it accordingly, or adjust your system accordingly. And that's part of what we're talking about, is ventilator physician example. I just saw an article, I think from last night or this morning in New York, about this problem. It's not the ventilators, it's the people. It's those healthcare professionals. That's the bottleneck now. It's no longer Ford pumping out 50,000 ventilators in 10 days or whatever the statistic was. And you have that Defense Production Act to pull the ventilators through, but now how are we going to manage the next bottleneck and anticipate that next bottleneck?
Any other
Absolutely.
comments that from your white paper that is important for our viewers to be aware of, that we want to comment on? And by the way, we'll remind our viewers and listeners that the white paper is available. If you'll go to the advanceiowa.com or the cbgi.uni.edu web pages and see our links to the archived videos, the webinars, you'll be able to click to request the white paper, and we'll be happy to send this over to them, to you from our guest here. Any other last comments you have about things from your experience or from the white paper that you'd want them to know about?
If you want to reduce your day-to-day stress, then I recommend point number 11, which is your tolerance for losses. Your company probably is going to experience some losses or less profits than you would normally achieve. In my world, if you understand your tolerance for losses and you think about your stakeholders, you take the day-to-day stress away. So in case we look at a medium-sized business, if they're willing to lose $750,000, and by the way, it's an investment, it's not a loss. It's an investment in the rebound. It is not a loss. If you're going to invest that $750,000 in a recovery, it makes your day-to-day a lot less stressful, as opposed to what can I do today to stop a loss from happening, which causes a series of 30, 60, 90 days of incredible stress. You're assessing your tolerance for losses is very important. And knowing who your stakeholders are, it is not just the owner. It's the bank that's invested in you. It's the vendors that have invested in you. It's the employees, and it's your customers. And thinking about what are you willing to invest to have your company come out of this in a very positive fashion, very robust fashion, and not stressing about it every minute, every day, which tends to lock up our continuous improvement. That'd be my suggestion for what to think about to maybe make each day a little less stressful.
Perfect. Dan?
Yeah, I think that I was looking back at, the white paper in general has a good list of a dozen or so bullets of things to be thinking about. We wrote that paper actually 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks feels like 2 months with how fast and furious things have been going. So even some of the things that I was reflecting on from the last couple of weeks, like some of these newer healthcare conversations and plant shutdown conversations I've been having, have lended itself to even some new ideas that aren't necessarily in the paper. I know I've been talking a lot about just doing more with less, having fewer people in manufacturing and production processes because of social distancing and social barricading. there's an area of research from the Toyota production system called Shujinka, one of our many Japanese terms that we borrow in lean manufacturing and operations from Toyota. This idea is that you have to develop production processes with less people. And so whether it's, we talk a lot about social distancing out in the workplace, when you get into or in the retail space, let's say, you go to Hy-Vee, Target, Fairway, et cetera. When you get into a working plant environment, we're seeing the outbreaks happening at ADM, Quaker, Deere Foundry, in terms of people testing positive, and then these social interactions that are happening. So some of the more, I suppose, ahead of the curve group in this area, partially because of timing, particularly some plants in California, have been looking at what they're referring to as social barricading, which is where you actually force separation rather than encourage separation. So think about the next time you go into that grocery store. I just saw the racetrack at Hy-Vee yesterday, where they've got the markings on the ground. Well, you actually don't let people in. Some places like Walmart, you've seen, are limiting the number of people in and out. So how can I create in my operations this forced separation or social barricading is going to be the next evolution. And if you're interested in more of a little bit of a controversial idea about social barricading for safety, look at the Amazon cage a worker patent that they became notorious for a little while back. That was an idea about creating social barricades to prevent injury. And about 2 years ago, there was a lot of unrest over, oh my gosh, why would Amazon space people out like this? It's so inhumane. Well, not to suggest they're going to start putting people in cages. The idea there was to prevent workplace injuries. But think about that level of separation we're going to have moving forward in the longer run and how that plays in.
Perfect. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. It's been very insightful. One thing that we want to share that you've been gracious in offering, if you go to the website and request their white paper, there's a special offer that PFC Services is making where you can contact them and they will be happy to talk to you specifically about some issues that you have. So we would encourage you to go to either our advanceiowa.com site or cbgi.uni.edu webpage and then make that request. Any last comments that you guys have for our audience that that would be helpful to them as they're navigating through this turbulent time?
First and foremost, stay healthy, stay safe. Always make sure your people are keeping journals in case someone should get the coronavirus, because you're going to have to remap who they've contacted. It could cause you to shut down your entire operation, or it could just be a minor bump in the road. But either way, you have to track through that.
Right. And Dan?
No, I think that we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time here, and we'd welcome anyone following up with us to have additional conversations on the matter. But everyone be safe and be healthy, and think about keeping that spacing and distance from everyone.
Thank you to both of you for your time. You are correct. It's a lot of content and not much time. We purposely are trying to do these webinars so we can get information and facts out and then connect people with resource partners like you and others. I want to remind everybody that not only can you view this webinar in archive format later on our website, but we have several other topics that we've addressed on there as well, and we would encourage you to go and look at those topics and listen and watch, and hopefully you'll find great value in it. Gentlemen, we echo your sentiments. Thank you for coming. We want everybody to be safe. Please do the right thing. Be a little more patient than we normally would be, a little kinder than we normally would be, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.